Hello there, this is Mr. George, and this is Web Lecture 5.1. This is the beginning of the new unit, Unit 5, and Unit 5 is all about conflict resolution. Now, in the United States, we have lots of ways that our society deals with conflict and how to resolve it. There are the court systems, there is the legislature, there is the legislature and the president, the relationship between them, and we are constantly resolving conflict, not only in our government, but also personally. So we're going to start off this unit by talking about the ways that we can resolve conflict, and then as we move through this unit, we'll discuss how we apply these different types of conflict resolution to our real world. So let's begin. We're going to talk about 7 different types of conflict resolution, the first one being arbitration. Arbitration is where you have two parties that have a difference, and usually this is a pretty significant difference, such a difference that these two parties cannot resolve their conflict on their own. So typically in an arbitration situation, you have a third party come in that looks at the situation, hears both sides of the argument, and then in some sort of formal setting makes a decision that is binding. This is called arbitration. Now sometimes this happens between a labor union and a company if the workers are not happy with how they're being treated or the pay that they get, and oftentimes the government will come in and they will be the arbitrator of this issue. For example, when the garbage workers in New York went on strike, they were arguing against the actual city government. So the federal government had to step in and take control of the situation and tell the city and the garbage workers what the decision was. And so that was arbitration. Another example of arbitration is a jury trial. Oftentimes, whether it's a civil trial or a criminal trial, the two sides have come to some sort of conflict, and they have to ask a jury and a judge to be the arbitrators or make that final decision. And once that decision is made, neither side can argue against it because that is the final decision. Now the next type of conflict resolution is mediation. Now mediation typically is not as serious as arbitration, although there is a third party involved. But that third party is more like a guide, somebody that helps the arguing parties come to some sort of solution. So if there is a minor argument or minor incident, but you want the third party to come in and make a decision. So maybe you and a friend are having an argument and you go to a teacher, or maybe you go to a counselor, or maybe you bring in a third friend that isn't involved in the conflict to kind of listen to both sides and then help the two of you resolve that issue. An example of mediation would be marriage counseling. Oftentimes couples have a problem that they just can't resolve on their own, so they go to this third party, this objective party, to help them talk through the issue. If they want their marriage to work, oftentimes this is the best way to do it. Now the third type of conflict resolution is negotiation. Now this is where there are two parties that are trying to work something out. Sometimes a third party is brought in to bargain for one of the parties, and typically in a negotiation the outcome benefits one of the parties a little bit more than the other. So for example, a lot of times negotiations are made when it comes to contracts, and there's lots of different types of contracts, whether it be a contract for a job that you're going to have done. Maybe you sign a contract to have somebody build your house, or maybe you sign a contract when you're hired for something, but oftentimes that is where a negotiation takes place. If you want certain things and the employer does not want to give them to you or wants to give you only part of them, then you will negotiate to resolve that conflict. And so oftentimes a contract of any sort is an example of a conflict resolution when it comes to this negotiation. The fourth type of conflict resolution we're going to talk about is debate. Now oftentimes when we see a debate, particularly when it's a political debate, we see these two parties that are arguing, and they're doing so to persuade their opponent, or in some cases they're doing so to persuade the audience that's listening. And so regardless of what the outcome of the debate is, these two parties have specific sides that are oftentimes in opposition to each other, and they use their evidence to persuade, like I said, either their opponent, which in some cases is the way it works out, or to persuade the people that are listening to the debate. And as we often see, and as we're seeing in the Republican primaries that are going on, that often happens in a political discussion. Oftentimes you'll see that kind of debate, that back and forth argument, using evidence to persuade either your opponent or the people that are making the decision. In this case, the voters. The next type of conflict resolution is what's called compromise. This often happens when there are two parties and they're trying to come to some sort of a resolution, and oftentimes what will happen in compromise is that each side will give up a little bit of their demand in order to have that goal that both of them agree to. So oftentimes this happens if with two business partners, let's say, they both have what they think is a really good idea, but neither of them agree to the other one, so they'll give up a little bit of their idea to agree. Oftentimes compromise happens in marriages, it happens in partnerships of any sort where you have two people that have different ideas and they want to make things work. So they each give up a little bit in order to accomplish a common goal. An example of that is a peace treaty. So example, at the end of a war, when both sides clearly want specific things, they come together and give up a little bit of they want in order to end the war, in this case to find peace. Next type of conflict resolution, this is the next to last one, the sixth one, is collaboration. Now collaboration is interesting because this is typically when you have lots of different people involved, and oftentimes these people have a specific expertise in an area, and they're all working together for some sort of mutual goal. So if you're trying to come up with a resolution for the problem of global warming, then you might have a scientist from different fields all working together to come up with a solution. Or if you're trying to find a cure for a specific type of cancer, you might have different types of doctors coming together to come up with that solution. I often use collaboration with many of my colleagues if I'm trying to come up with a good way to teach writing. I'm certainly not a writing expert, but the English department, a lot of the people in there are writing experts, so I'll go to them and talk to them about how to best teach writing. So it's a collaborative process. So an example of collaboration, as I stated, is teaching. All the time I'm asking my fellow colleagues what they've tried and different techniques that they've used. We're constantly helping each other out to look for the best ways to be an effective teacher. So the last type of conflict resolution we're going to talk about today is consensus. Similar to collaboration, but in this case not everybody is an expert. This is when you have an agreement of lots of different people that all come together and they consider all the opinions of the members of the group, and by doing so you come to this general agreement, this, as we call it, consensus. And so oftentimes when you have a large group and you're all trying to make a decision that's best for everybody, you have to, and similar to compromise, give up certain things, but you all want to discuss it and come to an agreement that works for everybody. So maybe an example of this would be a family decision. Oftentimes in families you have different perspectives on what needs to be done, so if you all talk about what you want to do and all air your different opinions, then that may come to a consensus that everybody agrees with. So these are our different types of conflict resolution, and as I said before, we will find out how these different types of conflict resolution play out in the real world as we study the ramifications and the practical uses of these conflict resolution in the United States. Have a great night. Thanks.